We continued ferrying from the beach to the sloop, but on leaving the beach each time there was this plea, "You will come back." And on one occasion, when I said, "We have enough, we can't take any more," a little man wearing glasses, a little soldier, he put his 4 fingers over the side of the whaler, and he said, "Will you please take me, because I don't think I can stand any more. I shall be dead before you get back." There was a sergeant in the whaler, and he crashed his rifle down on this man's fingers and said, "You heard what the man said, we can't take any more." And he completely severed the 4 fingers, which fell into the bottom of the boat. The little man just fell back into the water and presumably died. Once again, we leant back on our oars. But these 4 fingers, I can see them now, with the fingernails bitten. He must have been a nervous little man. These fingers danced backwards and forwards in the bottom of the boat.
There was nothing special about second-class stoker Duncan Nichol, or the many other naval ratings who found themselves posted to Ramsgate in 1940 to man the fleet of little boats which filled the harbour. The Elizabeth Green, now a pleasure boat again, was just one of hundreds of small craft commandeered by the Admiralty, and Nichol found himself part of her 4-man crew. He teamed up with another stoker, an Irishman called Terence. Neither of them were particularly aware of the situation in France, nor of the plan to evacuate the massive British troops from the beaches of Dunkirk. Nichol, aged 26, a former gas engineer, was typical of the men who had volunteered at the outbreak of war, and this was to be his first experience of active warfare.
We looked at the blue sky, tiny trace of cloud, and I suppose it was an hour and a half out of Ramsgate. A little plane came down, and we thought, that's jolly nice, the Air Force is looking after us. But we were so ignorant, it wasn't one of ours. The thing fired its machine guns at us. We were hardly worth anything more. And the bullets ricocheted off the deck. They just spat off the deck of the Elizabeth Green, one going right between Terence's legs, fairly high up. And it took him a moment or two to realize that something untoward had occurred. And he said to me, "You know, Nick, that fellow was shooting at us, and he might have done us a mischief." And our heroic action was to go down through the hatch into the cabin of the Elizabeth Green and get under the table. Terence was a little underprivileged intellectually. He was, I should say, about 6'1" or 2", with enormous shoulders, slim hips, and a marvelous physique. And when Terence had nothing else to do, he'd dance on his feet like the pictures we've seen of Cassius Clay, and To keep his arm muscles flexible, he'd shadow box.
The Elizabeth Green joined the Armada, trailing a whaler behind her, necessary for rowing in close to the shoreline, where thousands of soldiers stood waiting. The small ships anchored out at sea, while rowing boats and whalers ferried the troops out to them. It was a painfully slow operation, which spanned the Whitsun holiday of 1940.
We rowed this whaler in to where the men were actually standing. And I suppose we could take 10, 12, or 13 men. But as we got more and more men into the whaler, she sank lower in the water, and then Iron Terrans had to push off with the oars to give us more positive buoyancy and bring in as many as we could. And the point came when I had to say, we cannot take any more. This is one of the most terrible moments in my life, to say to a man, I cannot take you. And they would say, you will come back. They were waiting in long, orderly queues. They waited patiently. There was no confusion or panic. They waited. And the poor fellows, once they were in the whaler and they were afloat, they thought, this is it, we're safe. And I don't know whether I can demonstrate, but we leaned on our oars, and some of the soldiers were so grateful that as I pulled back on my oar, the soldier sitting in front of me tried to push to make it easier for me. And then the perisher would go to sleep on the oar. Well, then I had to pull an oar and a soldier. We rowed the soldiers over to a sloop, who obviously had to stand off in the water where she could float. On the side of the sloop was a scrambling net. That is a net made of rope, and the holes are about a foot square. Now, for an active man, it's not difficult to get up a scrambling net, but for these exhausted, wet soldiers, it was difficult. The sailors in the sloop lowered heaving lines so the soldiers could hold on and be helped to be pulled up, and we, with our oars, pushed their seats up to assist them from below. And eventually we'd get rid of our load and we'd push off to get some more. And I do hope that any soldier will forgive me that our first action was to ditch all their rifles. When we were under attack, we all huddled in the bottom of the boat. Now, these fighters machine gunned us. It wasn't like modern rockets that would have gone right through two bodies in the bottom of the ship. They machine gunned us, and after the attack, we could hear, as the planes had left us, then we all eased up out of the bottom of the boat, and there was this ghastly reassessment of the position. Somebody, maybe 2 or 3, had been hit, and one had to form the opinion, and this is what is so disgraceful, that I, a second-class stoker, had to make the decision as to whether we should carry this man or gently slide him over the side. Now that is something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. 1 or 2 didn't die too easily, and young men, when they know that they are approaching death, usually think about their mother. And there were 1 or 2 occasions when I held a man in the last moments of his life, and he begged me to give a message to his mother, even giving name and address. And I would say, of course, old chap, I'll do this, and I'll tell your mother that the end came very bravely. And again, this awful business of over the side, and once again back to the oars and back to the sloop. And God forgive me, I forgot the chap's name, I forgot his mother's address. The only thing I can say was that I did pray both for the boy and for his mother. That is only a sop to my conscience. I couldn't possibly remember. On each occasion, there weren't very many, on each occasion when I had to place a body over the side, and I did do it as gently as I could, the soldiers looked at me in a way that I shall never forget. It wasn't my fault that the chap had died, and yet I had put him over the side, the final termination. The actual distance from the beach to the sloop was only about 20 minutes, I would say. Then there was this drill of ditching the rifles, which is awful. Somebody somewhere will hate me. And bailing out back to the queue. But as for how many hours we did it, I just don't remember. It must have been many hours. And I suppose altogether we took off about 200, 250, something of the kind. To them, me and Terence were the angels of mercy. God help us, we weren't. We were only taking them. We were only prolonging their lives for a little longer. But they, in their exhaustion, behaved magnificently. They really did. We went on rowing these chaps to the sloop until the captain of the sloop said, we can't take any more. The sloop, which is rather like a small destroyer, was packed like a sardine tin, and her decks were covered in troops. And we had orders to return to the Elizabeth Green, and then these stokers came down almost to masthead level and liberated a stick of bombs right amidships the sloop, and the whole hull, her own ammunition, blew up too, as well as the bombs, and the whole thing went zonk, and within minutes she was red hot, down to within about a foot of the waterline. There the hull was black and the sea water was boiling, and bits and pieces flew up and came down into the sea. Now this is too awful. Terence and I couldn't bear to look.
The Elizabeth Green returned to Ramsgate. The harbour was crowded with surviving boats, their crews, and the soldiers they had rescued.
We reckoned the war was over. We'd done our small bits. And then we expected an invasion, you see, by the Germans over to UK. And so I and Terence did relax a bit, and then we got the order, re-victual, refuel, and go back again. But this time, not with the whaler. Well, the ship next door had engine trouble, there was no doubt about it, and dear Terence got to know of this, and rippling these lovely muscles and putting a hand on my shoulder, he said to me, look here, Nick, you know about engines. Nick, we're going to have engine trouble. And I said, my dear Terence, it would be only too easy. But you know, they'd shoot us if they found we'd done anything like that. And Terence said, what? Our side would shoot us? And I said, yes, that's very serious, you see, it's sabotage. And Terence said, well, in that case, we might as well get shot by the enemy, so we'll forget about the engine trouble. And we got this ghastly ladder that was as long as the Elizabeth Green. Again, no hint as to what we were to do with the damn thing.
The ladder was to be used to rescue a group of soldiers marooned on a jetty. Thousands of British soldiers had been saved. Now it was the turn of the French.
We put up the ladder against the sea wall at the end of the mole, and Terence volunteered to nip up and have a look-see, as he called it. You see, there was a lot of shell fire. And I can well remember Terence's tin hat going about 1/16 of an inch over the top of the sea wall, and then sliding all the way down the ladder, and he said, they're foreigners. And I went up the ladder, I had another look, and I decided they were Frenchmen. And I was instructed by my CO to invite them down into our ship as quickly as possible.
With the French soldiers safely aboard, this time the Elizabeth Green set course direct for Ramsgate, but in deteriorating weather.
The French officer said to me, I and my comrades desire to be sick. Well, what does one say? I said, well, go ahead. But he said they want to be sick in something. And I said, well, let them take off their helmets and be sick in their helmets. And the French officer said, no, that would be very dangerous. This is a small craft, and we are under attack, and it would be dangerous for them to take off their helmets. Well, in a desire to please, I looked round the cabin of the Elizabeth Green, and in the pantry I found a whole lot of soup plates, and I gave each soldier a soup plate each, and I gave the captain, out of respect to the French officer, a tureen. And there they were, poor fellows, endeavoring to be sick as decently as possible. As the situation was deteriorating, they were getting very unwell. But nevertheless, we got them all safely back to Ramsgate. And I don't think I got a single word of thanks from anybody. Well, it was hardly a time to say thank you, perhaps. But I had to do the washing up, which I found was extremely unpleasant, because I don't know what they'd been eating. Frenchmen eat such odd things, don't they? Terence was the gossip, and he knew everybody's business. And he came back to me and said, Nick, they're getting survivor's leave. All you've got to do is to go to the Master-at-Arms, and you'll get a free travel warrant. Bob's your uncle, I think is the expression. Well, we presented ourselves, and the Master-at-Arms said, where did your craft sink? You see, this was survivor's leave. And Terence said, didn't sink. We've got her safely back in Ramsgate, all tied up. Master-at-Arms said, in that case, you're not entitled to survivor's leave because your craft hasn't sunk. And Terence said, well, Master, if you'll give me and Nick a quarter of an hour, we'll see to that, and we'll be back with Elizabeth Green, you see at the bottom. And he halted us in anger. A Master-at-Arms in the Navy is something like a super regimental sergeant major, marvelous power of command. He halted us in our tracks, and he said, you'll stay there until I've seen the CO. He came back and said, the commanding officer in these circumstances has decided that you can have 7 days leave, not survivor's leave, leave. And you will, of course, get travel warrants. And Terence said, we want a fortnight's advance of pay because me and Nick are skint.
Over 250,000 soldiers had been brought home from Dunkirk by what was described as the Mosquito Armada. There was an unspoken knowledge that things had changed, people had changed. Dunkirk was an experience that everybody felt, through the individual's part in it. It changed the war to a reality.
Dunkirk changed me, but it changed me into what? I still don't know. I was the ordinary, reasonably decent young man. But on my return, on this survivor's leave, I returned to my mother's home, a lovely cottage in Sussex, sunlit, and she said to me, Duncan, I'm so glad to see you. It must have been awful, and was it noisy? And I said, yes, Mother, it was, dear. And she said, I've got your room all ready for you. And Duncan, I've got new curtains. I'm dying to know whether you like the new curtains or not. If you don't like them, say so and we'll change them. Well, I went up to my room and I said, my dear mater, you couldn't have chosen better. I couldn't tell you now what the curtains were like, but I thought, well, let us do no more damage anyway. Mater's pleased to see me, and for heaven's sake, be grateful for that. I think I kept my eyelids slightly closed so she couldn't see right into my face, and hoped that she wouldn't realize, she wouldn't dislike me.
In a speech shortly after Dunkirk, Winston Churchill said, "We must be very careful not to assign to this deliverance the attribute of a victory."